Did you know NCSoft made a MOBA? Well, more than that, it was a MOBA, battle arena game, and even had such things like a hub world, 2 playable characters, and more. MxM might have lasted as long as an opened can of beans, but I have been wanting to cover it for some time, especially as people have been requesting it for some time. MxM for me is the perfect example of an online game that had everyone else around beat on feature set and sheer content offered, yet still somehow went under in just a couple of months. MxM, or MxM as it's often called, was developed by Studio MxM, an internal NCSoft division, and published by powerful Korean online gaming publisher NCSoft. The game would launch June 21st, 2017, but within the same year would announce to be shutting down the game at the start of the next year in January of 2018. What went wrong with NCSoft's first attempt at both a top-down action game and a MOBA? And why was the title shut down in such a short time despite being as brag-worthy as I have mentioned in terms of its feature set? We will find out all of this and more mysteries to uncover in this episode of Death of the Game, a series where we take the chronological timeline of a particular game or company and navigate it, perusing for clues and bits of evidence along the way that will help us determine what the largest contributing factors to the death of a game or company is. Finally, when the timeline terminates, we put all of those clues together for the final deduction, before hinting at the next case at the very end of the episode. Thank you for the continued support on the channel and other avenues. I would like to politely remind everyone that Tom and I do this for a living, and we intentionally don't make content for the popular algorithm. Because of this and our niche and educational style content, we rely on patronage from our viewers on top of the support on the channel to help cover costs. Please consider becoming a member or using the donate button on YouTube or joining our Patreon. We also have some other links you can use in the description for affiliate stuff like Amazon and the like. Thanks for the support, and we will keep talking about dead, dying, and fading virtual worlds until the wheels fall off. Please note, we're still waiting for an art overhaul, so apologies on the delay. Without further ado, we have a case to solve. The story begins with the first announcement of NCSoft's new title, not an MMORPG, which was unique for them. Steparu, one of the biggest Eastern virtual world and online game testers, would test out MxM, as it was being dubbed, a MOBA from NCSoft, in the fall of 2014. While you would think that a game like this would mimic Dota or League of Legends more so in its approach, Steparu would actually report that the gameplay was closer to Heroes of the Storm, or Smite, due to it being more action-focused and having a top-down 3D form. More news would come out about NCSoft's first internally developed MOBA concerning the fact that it was also supposed to be set for multiple platforms, starting with the PC and eventually coming to mobile. MxM would receive an open beta in 2016, this time showcasing their much lauded later on PvE mode and the core tag system the game and name was built on, though this was only in Korea. The most unique parts of MxM, besides the game being more action-oriented and featuring WASD movement, was the fact that you could play as 2 different heroes, or in this case, masters. You could even swap between them in the middle of combat, Marvel vs. Capcom style. This would allow you to switch between masters when you got low, or just felt like one was better suited in a moment to land like a particular combination or something. The second most unique aspect of MxM was the fact that it was a compilation/crossover game that would feature characters from other NCSoft games like Blade and Soul, Lineage, Ion, and much to the frustration of many fans of the time, City of Heroes. Reportedly, the PvP mode would be a classic 3-lane MOBA map with some twists added to it, such as a Titan that you could spawn like one on the Heroes of the Storm map, and more of a focus on objective control compared to League of Legends and Dota 2. There would even be, for the first time in a MOBA, officially at the start, mini-games included with the game. I thought this was a cool and quite unique concept, especially when most MOBAs and their secondary modes and casual modes are kind of developed by playing the game for long periods of time and kind of figuring out the mini-games on accident. Like how ARAM became an official mode in League of Legends, while before it was our favorite custom game lobby mode that we used to have to enforce by just telling everyone to go mid. Anyway, PvP, PvE, and minigames meant that MxM wasn't looking very bare bones, and NCSoft was seemingly taking their entrance into the world of MOBAs quite seriously. In a bit of a bizarre turn of events, after MxM had already been played by Koreans for around 2 years, NCSoft would, after already globally announcing the game, would do so again, this time in January of 2016. The newest details revealed would be the fact that the game would feature a co-op story mode, which would actually allow for actual RPG-style leveling, progression, and gameplay for players. What was worrying to me, besides how long MxM was being played and cooked in the oven, but only in Korea, was that the game didn't announce a business business model yet. You have to think, MOBAs like League and Han had already been out for like 6 years at this point. The longer you allow the gap to widen and your game to age in the process, that wasn't going to improve much. Heroes of the Storm had launched 2 years previously, and while it had a strong start like all Blizzard games, it was one of the highest profile MOBA failures as well, same as Battleborn, though that would come much later. MxM was moving slow, and worse, was bringing a lot of the Heroes of the Storm mechanics and gameplay to an audience who already had the game, and way more reason to support Blizzard over NCSoft just in terms of the recognizable characters, like Diablo himself, and obviously way more like Murky, and so much more. And for the record, HOTS had a super long development cycle as well due to a lot of the aspects that I explained in that episode of Death of Game, so go check that out. But point being, MxM was late. They were very late to the party. They were so late to the party that they showed up bringing something that somebody else already brought in excess. Like whenever I showed up to a Mexican party bringing chips and there was already 13 bags. To make matters worse, at least in my eyes, the closed beta for MxM would take place April 7th, 2016, and would allow players from the West to test the game for the first time. Problem being, they were selling founder packs alongside this, which... wait, what? This is NCSoft that we're talking about. They don't need funding in the same way as most. They are a massively successful publisher, and they're selling founder packs? To me, it both spoke to not having enough faith in your product, when nearly all successful MOBAs got successful by being free and accessible, and not understanding the market. And while they did invite some players for free, why even have founders packs? My guess is they saw the success of XL Games in Korea with ArcAge, and then globally. IGN would get their hands on the game in the spring of 2016 and would be quite positive regarding the PvE game content offered. These would literally be the sort of thing that Overwatch would later promise and never fulfill. Leveling, character growth, and the ability to obtain new loot and upgradables to use on your adventures. You could even upgrade your abilities. While there was progression on weapons too, and nodes aka runes, and like I just mentioned, ability upgrades, the ability upgrades would only affect the PvE modes, so you wouldn't be forced to level them. MxM, 3 years after being played in Korea and the following year it was played in the West, would finally launch June 21st, 2017 on PC only. MxM was focused on a philosophy of teamwork. Things like objectives and long death timers would reflect this. MxM on aggregate review website Metacritic would score a 76 out of 100, which wouldn't blow the doors off exactly, but was plenty salvageable. MxM was super unique compared to most multiplayer games these days, in that it launched with tons of content with no need to breadcrumb it later on. It also had tons of masters to choose from up to 30, and there were even 4 different ways to play MxM. The first was the classic MOBA style 3-lane push mode, Titan Ruins. In Titan Ruins you had lanes protected by towers and a jungle full of multiple varied objectives. For example, hero altars would be captured and would spawn hero minions for your team. Or you could capture sight towers that would grant you vision, sort of like the Xel'Naga towers in StarCraft. The main focus of the mode, however, was based on the objectives, including spawning your giant titan to fight against the enemy, much like Heroes of the Storm would also feature on a couple of their maps. The difference being, and this is a heavy one, is that in MxM it was even more objective-based than Heroes of the Storm, due to the inclusion of a ticket system. These tickets were based on completing objectives and, of course, getting kills and assists. Issue being, objectives granted way more points, and thus it rewarded more objective play. This was intentional, which is cool, but as Heroes of the Storm would display as well, an over-focus on that becomes problematic, especially for general matchmaking experiences. Simply put, it just makes things much harder to carry, which makes your solo experience not nearly as fun and powerful feeling as games like Dota and League of Legends. The second way to play the game was the PvE mode, which was totally unique to MxM, especially when you consider how much effort was put into it in comparison to the other games. You could level up, progress your character, and fighting increased threats in the process, in a less competitive environment. There were even boss fights and other exciting gameplay opportunities presented in the PvE. The third way to play the game was the minigames, and while this sounds like an awesome idea, sadly these minigames were both not really fun and plagued by the lag issues that also affected matchmaking. Part of this was compacted by the fact that the servers for NA players would sometimes be selected from as far as Brazil, which would lead to some players having around 150 ping or higher. This is crazy in a action MOBA. The minigames weren't super fun because they relied a lot on the hero that you would draw for a particular style of minigame, as some would just have major advantages. The final way to play the game, which I've sort of kept as a secret up until this point, was the fact that you could play MxM like Battle Right, or a battle arena brawler. Battles would take place on a different, smaller battle arena map and only feature up to 3v3, but would feature way more action-centric combat. This meant that Master X Master basically had 3 games in one. Okay, well, technically there's another way to play the game, but it was more so used as a way to group with players and have places that you could spend some of your currencies on. That being that there's actually a hub world in Master X Master, where you could run around and see players in your region and zone. This was very similar to how things worked in games like MMORPGs, which Master X Master felt like in some ways, such as PSO and even Global Agenda. I also think that it was cool because not only was it the first time that a MOBA attempted it, to my knowledge, it was a cool middle ground that would likely attract MMO players, which largely made up NCSoft's player base. MMORPG.com would review the game, it being an NCSoft game and all, and would rate the game an impressive 8.2 out of 10, enjoying the WASD movement, the diverse cast of characters, and how much content was included in the game. The most negative aspects recounted being the fact that the Titan mode for some reason also had a ticket system, aka that you score an X amount of points and you just win, just like in Battlefield or Squad, and it had confusing and cumbersome itemization. Many of the reviews that you can find online, and there aren't many of them, echo many of these sentiments, with different ratings granted for such. This speaks to how many critics were feeling the same way with Master X Master, a good game but seemingly not offering enough to distinguish it. And it had super non-existent hype, which was contributing to a poor critical reception, which would in turn lead to less of a good audience reception in the process, and less players playing the game. Master X Master and its WASD action combat was fun and different, but not demonstrably better than HOTS, LOL, or Dota in terms of what it offered as like gameplay, right? And it offered less strategic teamfighting aspects in some cases. The game's also a little bit less volatile because it's a lot more focused on the objectives. And to be fair, the other games could be reconfigured for such movement for WASD, with less of a top-down 3D approach and look for sure, but similar nonetheless. Now, you might be saying, but that's not that similar. The 3D aspects, though, of Master X Master feel like it would actually make the game stand out and be a positive, as it looks better than just all of its competition graphically, but I think part of the problem that occurred is that graphics are nice in MxM, but the visuals and presentation are quite poor and forgettable. I mean, let's just start with the name and look of the masters themselves. Sure, Death Knight looks and plays the bill, but what about Ignuma, which looks like a Balrog but actually has a range damage dealing approach with a shield, who also dives in? It's just confusing design both game and visual wise, and there's way more examples than that. The art style is also utterly forgettable too, with many portraits of the characters looking no better than mobile games I've played and regretted. Visual identity is supposed to make you know and sort of anticipate what a character does, and the visual identity in Master X Master is not only generic, it's hard to actually anticipate what the characters do. I mean, look at the portraits for League of Legends, and I mean even just art-wise. A game that looks worse graphically, but it's like the artists that work on it didn't get the memo. But that's the difference between art style and graphics, and before more legions of dorks in the comments echoed the same silly sentiments from a previous video containing this exact subject, art and visual style is not just opinion. It's not something you can just hand wave as, well, this is Nerd's opinion or somebody else's opinion. There actually has to be some sort of cohesion to things, and things have to make sense for what they are. MxM was competing with other MOBAs who already had established characters and really good presentation packages with them if they weren't, and they couldn't compete in that aspect. Their cast of characters, while very fun and unique actually, were forgettable in many ways due to their visual identities. This is how LOL, a game that looks like it's from 2008, can still manage to be the biggest dog on the block, because they don't just rely on the graphics, which age the fastest, but visual identity also make a game more unique. And MxM, despite not being a generic Korean MOBA clone, looks like one. And this is the issue of where relying too much on your home market for feedback is potentially problematic, because maybe NCSoft's Korean gamers were okay with it, and because it's kind of more of the same, with nicer visuals obviously, but most of the world wouldn't be, and well, wasn't. MxM would update their game following launch finally, nearly 3 months later, which was quite a long time for an online multiplayer game, and well, update 1.3 wasn't very well received, to put it bluntly. While I can't show you examples of this as I often do with things like Steam, due to how NCSoft scrubbed anything related to MxM from the web, I've gotten multiple testimonies on this particular point specifically. The update would add a new game mode, natium Defense Line, which was a horde mode that was supposed to increase in difficulty, an obvious response to the fact that despite having good PvE, Master X Master's PvE was insanely easy and not properly balanced. But that was something that they could fix. MxM would also introduce a new master, Titus, a support character, and a number of balance changes. The reason that this update is received so negatively is actually due to the major changes that happened to the currency that you would use in the game. Soul. Soul now was way harder to earn, and you were required to do daily quests to even be able to really earn any of it. Problem being that this is a classic free-to-play tactic to try to get you to play more or have to spend more money to skip the progression. This was significant because even in ranked, things like weapon progression would actually help you do more damage and be more powerful. So yeah, you needed to, in typical Korean fashion, grind and Master X Master to be good at the PvP modes even. Xcoin was the premium currency and really only accessible from purchasing it. And a player would calculate how long it would take to unlock a free master, and it wasn't as long as Riot Games' League of Legends these days, but it was still really long. On top of that, the store in Master X Master was huge, and there were tons of things that you could spend money on which had really bad values to them. For example, you could buy a bundle that was supposed to give you multiple characters and skins, but it only gave you one character's skins and it wasn't a character bundle. Or that a single master would cost as much as $20, and there's 30 of them, so do the math. Even if some of them are given for free or rotated out, you're still spending like $200 to play 10 new characters, which is not very good value. You have to think, LOL has like 169 current champions, and to purchase all of them it costs around $600 to around $700. That's not counting if you use IP, which is freely earned. I mean, just do the math. Or be like me and have friends who can do it for you. You're getting way less value in MxM for a game with far less players that had next to no hype cycle. So many people didn't even know it came to the West yet. Free-to-play or not, free-to-play games need to make money, which kind of makes it an oxymoron. And if they don't have a sustainable audience, it's kind of a death knell, because it's not like they can suddenly make the game free-to-play and bring a bunch of players back or new players when it was already free-to-play. MxM wasn't doing well, and there were reports pre-November of players struggling to find lobbies and requesting other players to play during prime times, something you would only see in a game that would have a small audience. This is not something that you wanted to see in a MOBA. MOBAs need rather large audiences and player pools, like most competitive multiplayer games, to function properly due to the focus on ranked modes and mastery of difficult-to-play characters. When you only have the most elite players playing, they just burn through about everyone else in no time. You can see this with Han, who took a super competitive player approach to their audience and marketing, which alongside their toxic community, sent most casual players packing. Heroes of the Storm, as much as I consider it a major failure, that's really only because of the expectations placed on it, and how much Blizzard pulled the plug on it. I think it was a pretty successful game in many ways, and it brought players I never saw play MOBAs to MOBAs, and it brought in new and cool concepts that people still miss and enjoy today. And that's where another big issue with Master X Master lies, which we kind of have already mentioned. They were essentially going head to head with HOTS, a behemoth with far bigger and sexier IPs being featured, and HOTS, in every way, shape, and form, was just a better and more well-rounded game. I'll explain. While Master X Master essentially had 4 ways to play the game, they weren't necessarily the deepest ways due to how spread their focus was. For example, Titan Mode, the only PvP mode in the game that mimics a classic MOBA, and even then, it resembles a single map in HOTS. Yep, a single map for a whole game mode. For contrast, HOTS had 15 maps, each all having unique visuals, styles, and objectives. This means you essentially had 15 ways to play the game, within just the PvP. And sorry, the objective-based modes and maps in HOTS, which were most of them, were just way better than the single map that was offered in Master X Master. With PvE, while it's arguably the best PvE in MOBA history, it still had some pretty big issues that are more compacted by the fact that MOBAs are similar in ways to action RPGs and thus will get compared to them. I mean, speaking of which, look at Lost Ark that would come later to Korea, and then the globe. It looks extremely similar to Master X Master, and while I would love to connect the two in more than just my theory, they actually were built in different engines and by different developers and publishers. But for reference, I was testing Lost Ark as far back as like 2016, which was a full year before MxM would even launch, and Lost Ark still to this day, and certainly for the time that I played it, has some of the most impressive visuals and combat I've experienced yet. And well, we all know that Lost Ark blew the fuck up. So while Master X Master was never quite given a fair shake, as NCSoft wouldn't waste any time announcing that they would be shutting it down due to basically financial concerns or reasons, its influence does seem to be still felt in the market. I mean, hell, look at Pokemon Unite. It looks weirdly similar, but once again, has a much better presentation and recognizable characters. It was also given proper time to hype and sell to the globe, and not just a local audience either, a common problem of many NCSoft games, and well, Korean games in general. And well, the final KO punch comes from the fact that Pokemon Unite is playable on mobile devices and the Switch. And Lost Ark announced about a year ago they would also be coming to mobile too. These games are just far more accessible, with more of an educated idea on who the target audience is supposed to be and was. Old MOBA players didn't play action games. I know because I was playing Dota, All-Stars, and Warcraft 3. Younger players more so do, and did, and non-endemic to the market players too, of course. Pokemon Unite could have been a model something like MxM Master followed, if it didn't want to try to further compete with Heroes of the Storm, whether they knew it or not, which they basically didn't have a choice after they put their ship on that path, and they, well, lost. After its announcement a few months later, MxM Master would shut down, January 31st, 2018. And while some might argue that this really shows how dire the straits were for the game in NCSoft, I would like to remind everyone, as I like to typically, that NCSoft picked up their ball and went home, after barely even playing a few games of basketball. For those not keen on sports, they released one major patch or update, the people hated it, and they gave up. Basically, MxM Master has a super short legacy, which is even shorter due to how little the game was hyped, and how little diehards were willing to defend it in the end. Fast forward a few years after the shutdown, and Vice would write an article about MxM and how much it was still around. Well, sort of. Really, they were just mentioning that despite how short-lived MxM was, it made a serious impression on people who still follow it to this day on the subreddit for MxM Master. Sadly, as of 5 years later, there's still no community servers for MxM Master, and progress on a community server seems to be pretty snail pace, making the unique action-focused MOBA sort of lost to time. Well, besides the videos out there and their old YouTube page that's still up for some reason, there isn't much left of MxM Master on the internet. That's a large reason I wanted to cover it, as I think that it was mishandled quite heavily, and yet forgotten all the same due to how short it actually lived. Now, if you hear the music playing in the background, that's because we've reached the end of the timeline, and thus have gathered enough clues and bits of evidence that we would need to crack this case finally. And so, why was MxM Master shut down so suddenly after launching, and why did it die and find itself on the death of a game series? Well, detectives, in case you missed any clues along the way, let's open our journal and deduce this ourselves now. Lack of market research and belief. NCSoft didn't properly support nor handle the game. Very little hype and community building. Generic lifeless art and presentation. Mixed game design and focus. Stiff competition, and it was late to the party. I feel for MxM Master and the players who didn't get the chance to play it, and even those that did get a chance to play it. It got such a bad reputation largely from how it was handled by NCSoft, who looked like they had no business handling a MOBA. Worse, you don't have a chance to still play the game, so I can't tell you guys to go check it out and see if my hyping of it was really worthy or not. Instead, you have to watch the gameplay displayed throughout this video. And remember, this was a hub world ARPG styled MOBA that had a PvP mode, a PvE mode, a progression system, a battle arena 3v3 mode, and 30 masters that it launched with on top of all of that. It was a truly impressive game that you might just have to take our word for it. Sometimes the key to a game's success has nothing to do with its graphics, gameplay, or the fact that it has tons of content or not. That's what makes multiplayer gaming so difficult to master. Puns, or even find your footing in. Much more popular IPs and developers have tried before and after NCSoft, and have also failed. This is a genre that's still dominated by League of Legends and Dota 2 to a great degree. Now, MxM Master had potential, but NCSoft acted like a person terrified to ask someone out that they really like and have a social relationship with. It's like at some point, you just have to commit to it, you know? You just gotta do it. Just do it, Nike. Nothing was wrong with NCSoft trying to get into new markets, but them doing it continuously, like with MxM so haphazardly and timidly, was certainly wrong and only further cementing in their minds that it wasn't a worthy endeavor, as they would just continuously fail. MxM Master and its handling just didn't work. Thanks for watching, and if you got a chance to play MxM Master, let me know how it was in the comments below, and if you didn't, tell me why you think that the game could have actually had a chance or not. Until the next case.